legitimately, it's like what I was seeing was completely different than what the render was seeing. I was like, everything's turned on.
One thing that you could do is like with these light, you probably were messing with like this and stuff. If you do this, you can't see it,
No,
but
no, no.
if you were to render it, the cue's still
No,
there.
I'm aware of that. Like
But if you put this,
I checked and made sure everything was turned on, and literally it was telling me like, oh yeah, you have like your cabins and whatnot is turned on, everything's turned on, and it's at a really low thing. But we're gonna render this and take up the entire space. And it's
oh
like,
my gosh,
so,
that's crazy.
the house, like the indoor thing.
Mm.
I've made an indoor like one before where I just like took a cube and just made it bigger basically.
Mm.
But like I couldn't remember how it was that I did it to where I could have basically like a see-through wall or something and mess with the
Oh,
color.
We'll do that later today.
I believe it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, UV rendering doesn't do the best with like transparent surfaces.
All right. It is Wednesday. So you know what time it is.
I was legitimately like, I can't remember how to do it. I was like, I know it's very thin.
I gotta mess around with and figure out if like modifiers work with like glass like textures on UV because I know there's a way to make it work.
So here we go. Here is Adrian.
Hi, my name is Diana, and this is my indoor
There we go.
scene. And so I only did two walls and the floor. I did the arrays. I did like a brick. It's supposed to look like planks, but it's like
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I didn't mention this, but the
Hi, my name is Diana, and
this happened last semester as well. Should have mentioned it. So yeah, once you see the array modifier, thinking that you're like, oh yeah, you could use this to set up these kind of bricks and stuff. Good. It's a really great, identification of the potential use of that, but cross that out in your notebook. It's not the way that you would actually make bricks. The bricks would be in the material, in any sort of like even remotely performant system, right? So modeling each brick is not, like obviously we know we want to avoid a bunch of internal geometry if possible, and this would be, like the opposite way of doing that. So fine for this one. And with, like this amount of bricks, it's not going to be, the critical error. But just to be clear, some other people may have done the same thing, like using the, array modifier or the scatter on surface to make bricks or stone paths or stuff like that for any sort of large area is just not the way you would want to go about it. Once we learn some more about materials, that will be clear as to how you would approach that, but just to let everyone know about that. Okay, but yeah, a bunch of people did this. They did their inside scene as if we're inside the log cabin, which I hadn't really thought about, but yeah, that's cool.
scene. Arrays. I did like a brick. It's supposed to look like planks, but it's like a brick. And I did like a bunch of arrays, and then I copy and pasted it. And then I did this little desk and a chair. And then I added this little light. This is the forest. I did the rays. Well, it's not.
So here, I believe, can we see her? Yeah, so I think some people were asking about the candle here in this one. And yeah, so there's the emission channel. Did we talk about the emission channel at all here? Not yet. Okay, there's emission channel, which makes the thing light up, but it makes it self-lit to some extent. it doesn't like cast light into the scene in a way that you could light the scene. And so taking a, why is my shortcuts are not working? Did I not start this? There we go. Okay, now my shortcut's working. Here, making a light object and putting it like right there. That's not inside. This now, it appears, this gets self-lit from the emission and then it appears as if there's light coming around. So we'll do this again multiple times throughout the semester with the light stuff. Very nice.
This is the forest. I did the raise. Well, it's not. No, it's not a raise. It's the scatter on surface. So yeah, the scatter on surface, my trees, and then this little hill. And this is my cabin. The fireplace. The doorknob and everything. Hi, my name.
Cool. So I'm sure some other people talked about this, but I'd be curious. Being able to see some more of the process here would be good when you're explaining it. But I mean, how many of you ended up using the array modifier for the log cabin? Yeah, I mean, that was what I imagined people would do. I mean, you could place each log, quote unquote, by hand, but that's only slightly less work than making like a real log cabin. Whereas, using the array modifier, at least for the sidewalls and perhaps the roof, allowed you to, have an expandable range of logs. And then, the other thing that you could possibly do here, and I think some people did, was using some of the randomness to make the logs perhaps look less, perfectly aligned, depending on the craftsmanship level of your log cabin contractor here. Cool. Okay, that was good. Very nice. Here is Celeste. Okay, so either Celeste didn't record audio, she probably just didn't record audio. So check your settings in OBS. Over here, right? When you're recording, you got to glance at this to make sure that there's audio coming in over there. So we'll try to guess what she's saying. Here's her forest. There we go. Nice to see people were trying to get the log cabin relatively to scale with the trees. That works. You've got the flat top log cabin in the array over there. And it looks like Celeste has some organization there in terms of the scene. So, the primary use for the collections is really just organizing the outliner, right? That's the name of this, the Blender name for that part of the interface over there. That's good. And then, doing this, if we know we're just going to look at it from one camera angle and then creating a background and putting it on a plane, that's an okay strategy that will work in some instances. It's not super flexible, but that's if we know we're just, if we know the camera's going to be here facing this way so that we don't see the edge of the plane, it's like a continuous backdrop, then that can work in those kind of situations. And the indoor scene, she's got a lamp and a bed and walls. Good.
Could I just ask, did I miss something about materials important? Because I couldn't find any textures like that.
No, we haven't talked about it. Some people just threw some stuff on here. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but a lot of them have a lot of problems here. They're stretched, and we have to discuss projection, and maybe that's next week's exhaustive lecture on texture space. We'll see. Okay, but check out your recording settings because you got no audio there. Here's Alondra.
So this is my outdoor scene, and it was really fun to do this plane, especially the rocks and stuff. I was just messing around with all the brushes and you could use in edit mode and stuff. I did do the joining thing with the trees, and it was kind of hard to do because I just couldn't find the placing right, so I just had to keep fixing that.
I think you're referring to
Doing the light.
to the anchor point or the origin of the tree, right? We want the anchor point or origin to be at the bottom, sort of in the trunk. Anytime you're going to use the scatter on surface or the array, making sure you manage the anchor point is critical because that's it has to use a point to position stuff in space, and that's the point it's using.
Too. The light was pretty fun. I colored these. I'll show you in a moment. This is my other one. Oh, that's not it. This is my other one. I didn't know what we had to do for an indoor scene specifically, so I just did like these stars and I just colored them. So I kind of wanted to make it like shooting stars, but just in a box, I guess. So I colored them. I kind of made them metallic. You can't really see that right now, but I had fun shaping them, even though it was kind of hard to do that because the brush was just really weird and difficult with me. These are what they look like rendered. This is a tree, the outdoor, and this is indoor. I kind of zoomed in too much on it, but other than that, I really like how they turned out.
Yeah, nice. Okay, and then she used some of the brushes over here. And so if you're going for that sort of low poly look, that's okay. But, what is the modifier that would round out some of these jagged edges? Yeah, backpack was right. Subdivision surface, right? Subdivision surface is going to round this stuff out. And then, yeah, it seems like you're not controlling, right? When we see the individual faces, what is this called? Right? Every time I ask you guys a question, every question is an open notebook question. Like, it warms my heart that when I open a question, I hear people frantically flipping paper because that means you know that possibly you do have it written down and now you're looking it up. Or frantically jamming your button to look at the other pages of your note, right? Faceting. And so when we don't want to see the individual faces, we want to turn on shade, some variation of shade smoothing, okay? For right now, there's shade flat and shade smooth. It's a longer story than that, but for right now, there's those two things. And so if we wanted this to appear so that we don't see the individual faces there, then we would turn on shade smoothing. Okay, very nice, Alondra. These are coming along. Here's Brianna.
Hi, I'm Brianna. Sorry if the audio is too loud. I tried messing with it. It's now going into the yellow.
Nope, audio.
This is my work that I did. We have the forest over here where I just noticed a gap. I never noticed that. Okay. But so we have the forest, and I had a lot of fun with making this. I have no idea how to get the trees to not be in the cabin, so we ignore that. There's totally no trees in the cabin. And then we have the room that I made. I kind of just wanted to do a dark theme because I couldn't get the sun in a way to where you would see like light coming in through this open gap. So I decided to go with a night thing.
It's happening
most
here.
of the like scenes that I made.
The sun to be going in through that area because then I feel like it makes it like with the photo it would make it look very obvious that there's just a giant gap and it's not like just a room.
Which gap are you referring to here? The
So the gap that's right in front where you're looking right now. I'm not talking about like the window.
oh, not going through there. Okay, yeah, I see. Yeah, we'll talk about that.
Like for the trees, I just did a cylinder and then put a cone and stretched it and extruded it. All of that stuff. Same with the room. There's I placed the origin for the objects by just going here. I might be a little confused on the question, but that's fine. And I don't have any questions for the project, but I had fun making it.
Cool. That's great. Yeah, these both look really good. And then, yeah, this issue of having the light come in here, but actually having a wall there, we can look at that because it can relate directly to the information we covered on Monday about really understanding what face normals are. And so if you understand what face normals are, you can set up a room that addresses that issue. Cool. Very nice sense of scale here with like the density of the trees, and then, yeah, the background. We'll talk more about that later. That works. Cool. Very nice. And here's Kate.
Hello, my name is Kate, and these are my two Blender scenes. This is the forest scene that I made following the instructions, and this is the cabin that I made out of the modifiers and the cylinders, and I imported a texture from BlenderKit just to make it look a little cooler. And for my indoor scene, so I made two objects out of joining a couple shapes together. I made a toaster and something that resembles a piñata. On Monday we went over the inset tool, and when I saw it I just wanted to make a toaster, so here it is. But I did join more objects to it, like you can see here. These were originally cubes that I stretch and scaled in order to make it look like the thing you pull on the toaster. And I also added in a circle and just stuck it in there to make it look like the dial. And then the piñata objects, those ones I had a little more fun with. As you can see, it's a circle, and then I put cones on every side. And then after that, I put little circles over it. And then I ended up putting kind of like donuts in it. I kind of wanted it to go for like a spacey feel. And just to add a little more variety, I added cubes at the front and the back. And to kind of go for like the warm look that I wanted, I added in lights. There's one over here that's green, another one that's more orange up here, and then in the corridor just a bright pink. And yeah, I just made the room out of planes that I properly scaled. And yeah, those are the objects that I made and my scenes.
Very nice. Here, I appreciate the, non-standard room here, with the piñatas and everything. What, visually, Kate, what's missing with the lighting here? Yeah. Right. So the shadows really help communicate where things are in space, especially when they're floating, right? In terms of like, is this like mounted on the back wall, or is it there's distance? Right, having the shadows turned on. Did you intentionally turn them off? Yeah. So you got a small room with like a bunch of stuff in it, and the lights. You have this light over here, and maybe there's a light. Oh yeah, light here. Yeah. So maybe at least having one light with the shadows turned on then allows you to at least establish space, and then you can use the other ones to sort of add color to the scene and that kind of thing. But Yeah, because this not only does it, there's two downsides here. One, it makes it very difficult to sort of like locate things three-dimensionally if you really want it to look three-dimensional there. If you're just sort of using 3D to make, a completely, flat 2D image, that's a different thing. And then secondly, this artistically really references, sort of what would now be called, some sort of retro 3D look. But you'll hear me talk about this over and over and over again. In this postmodern world of creation, we can access retro styles. But for computer graphics, all of what's considered retro mostly looks retro because the technology wasn't as good as it is now. And so the reason a lot of things didn't have shadows before is because simply it's expensive to compute shadows, right? And so if you know that's what you're doing and that's why you're trying to do it, if you're trying to make it look like it was a game that was made on PS1 or whatever, right? Then great, you've achieved your artistic ends. But if you're doing that unintentionally, then that, I think, you want to address that in some way, right? And then also strategically, I like some retro things as well, of course. Like there's been quality things that have happened in the past. However, from a strategic standpoint, for you guys as students who want to eventually have jobs, if you're the best in the world at creating this sort of like retro look, then there's possibly employment for you. But making a bunch of stuff that looks like it was made 25 years ago may not be a great professional decision, right? And that's not what I know that's not what you're doing in particular. I'm just sort of using this as a instance to discuss that, right? I have a lot of students come in to like, I want to do everything in pixel art. That's great. I'm not sure there's a lot of, if you want to do that as your own personal art practice, that's one thing. If you expect to get paid to do that, that may be unrealistic. Yes.
Two questions. Okay, did you use a material color on the pinatas, or is that just lighting?
Material colors. I made them like pastel.
Okay. See the, I love the organization of the outliner. So the way that Kate did a collection for those things, I think that's kind of what I keep looking for.
Uh-huh.
The ability to put like 32 parts into a box and move it around without having to join them. Is that the way?
No. This is just the collections are only for the organization of the outliner. In order to move them around, you either need to parent them all to one thing, or that's what you want to do. You don't want to join them because then that presents other issues there, right? So this, this in Blender, this does not, using a collection does not do anything in terms of the actual transforms of the objects. It's just organizing the stuff in the outliner. That's it. Okay. So parenting objects is the strategy you should take there. Yeah, I agree. You should keep your outliner this organized, right? Because even now we were starting to glimpse this, right? Week 1, where we just have a handful of things in there, you can sort of just, freewheel it and you'd be fine, right? But as you start to have more stuff, like it's just got to be organized, or else it just kind of collapses in on itself at some point, right? So this is one of the things, like part of the upside of using these kind of technological tools is that we can do things at really, really large scales, meaning like, if week 1, I had never told you about the array modifier, right? And I asked you to make this forest. One possible way to do that would be to copy and paste all of these trees, right? And how many of you would have ended up with the density in your forest if that was the technique you had to use to make this forest? Almost none, right? Who's going to sit there and copy and paste 60 times? You shouldn't have to copy and paste 60 times on a computer, right? Like this is what computers are good at, is like iterative stuff, doing something over and over and over and over again. And so this is the value proposition of computation. I can do things many, 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 many millions or billions of times, but I need to be aware of the resources it takes to do that in order to not only have the computer do it, but then also stay within my capacity to understand what the heck I'm doing, right? If it gets so unorganized in the, I'm not saying your stuff is like this. If it gets so unorganized in the outliner, like there's a point at which the computer will be fine rendering it, but my ability to like remember and understand what it is I'm doing has been surpassed, right? I mean, I find this to be a constant pain point in digital generation. You know, the metaphor I use is like you're building, every time I feel like I'm building a house of cards. I can build a much larger house of cards than I used to build, but like at some point the whole thing just crashes in on itself because I've created this level of complexity that, you know, I myself can no longer properly parse, and you know, becomes sort of uneditable at that point. Okay, Sean.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Sean, and this is my out.
Okay, so Sean, your audio is a little low. If you could give me another like 20
Door blend. Pretty simple stuff here. I kind of had fun playing around with the lighting.
And then we can also only see like the top 2/3 of your head.
And I put most of my time in shaping the plane here and messing around with the trees. And I'm pretty happy with it for the most part. There are some things that I would change if I knew how, but I don't. Here's my little log cabin.
Is that your mouse? Is that his mouse? This thing here?
It could have been better, but I was having an issue joining the pieces with the array modifiers, and it was like making other parts of it disappear and stuff. So, well, the way I got it all to fuse together kind of took away the neatness from it, if that makes sense. But yeah, this is my outdoor blend. This here is my indoor blend. This lamp was one of my composite objects, and it was pretty fun. It's a cone, a cylinder, and a sphere that are flattened out, or it's a cone, a cylinder, and another cylinder, excuse me. And I had fun making.
Good. And you either joined them or parented them. I can't quite see here on your screen. So yeah, it looks like you might have OBS set to only capture part of your screen. So look at that. That can happen if you've got like a strangely or just unusual sized monitor. You can select the source, right click, and say transform fit to screen, and that'll make sure that we get the whole screen, because that becomes critical. Being able to see the rest of the interface becomes really important later on so that we can diagnose what's
making this lampshade shape with the cone and the down here I have little toruses under these cubes, and it's kind of supposed to be a little.
Yeah, so case in point right now, you're pointing at something that we can't see on the
like nightstand kind of thing almost. Sorry, there it is. You can kind of see them better this way. And I made those little toruses to kind of like be the legs of the nightstand. But yeah, this is my little indoor scene, and I had a lot of fun.
Cool, great. That looks good. You got things in there. The only thing to point out here from a lighting standpoint is, you know, just when you start to think about this, especially for indoor scenes, where are the lights? Most lights are mostly, you know, like in the ceiling, they're up. And so this light here, this is like having a light that's literally on the floor there, right? So that's going to cast these strange or just unusual shadows in the room, which unless you're doing that intentionally, maybe something to avoid. Okay, and Here's Max.
That's kind of yellow. Maybe I'll sit back here and talk. The whole time it was just mute button on my computer, so I'm just gonna use my computer microphone. But show you.
Okay, yeah, this sounds better than before. So. Okay, and that was before you were using the headset, right? And that.
I think the headset sometimes or somehow overrided it, like the mute button before.
Okay, I mean, you can make sure in OBS under the audio input properties here will be the list of all the stuff. Yeah. Okay, and you have it set to the computer, or not that. Yours will just say microphone. Okay. And move this back over here. And
Guys, my animations. Here is or not animations, more just a build, honestly. Here is my first one, the forest one. You had to do a couple things on this. I guess it was like, yeah, subdivide, uneven surface, the array modifier with the trees, blah, 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 blah. I kind of did a little bit extra here with this grass texture. I did it using the particles here.
particle system, right? So if you use the particle system, that's technically not a texture, but yeah, that's one of the ways to do that. This, particle system is a way of making copies more like instances, even more computationally advantageous. We can look at some of that there. But yeah, the downside here is that you can very easily make it quite
just using hair, and then I did for like texture just the image on plane, that node. So yeah, I did that. I guess was a little lazy. I could have did it for the cabin too, like a wood texture. I'm not sure, but yeah, I think this one came out pretty cool. Pretty proud of it. Also have the sky texture on, but at the same time my sun is still like doing most of the work, so I still got the sun in there. Then as far as
yeah, the sky texture thing for the most part is just going to be what you see. It's not casting light. Those two things are separate. So the sunlight is the thing that's actually lighting the objects, and then the sky texture on the world is just what we're seeing in the background.
another one goes, oh yeah, then I go.
It's not. It's in the shader view. So we'll get to that. Yeah.
Got the tree collection.
Yes.
Does it not affect, like, because I was, I guess when I was...
It depends on the render settings.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot to it. There was, like, elevation and angle.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to it, and it depends on how you're...
Jump here to... Yeah, where is it right here? Yeah, these guys. I didn't end up using that one because I didn't want to.
Yeah, so like when we did this before, I just turned off the visibility on these. Just, yeah, and so you can either do that or, yeah, like move them up, or a lot of people move them down below the scene, like so that if you have things that are going to be referenced, you can still easily access them, but, either one.
But anyway, on my indoor scene, this one I kind of just did, I watched a little video to get this nice little backdrop thing. It's kind of just like a bevel and then extrude up. And then I made this kind of like a little statue, mostly just sculpting for this base right here. And then it's supposed to be gold, didn't really show up that great. Yeah, there you go. Maybe that looks a little bit better.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about this. Reflective things, like shiny things, not only does the material settings need to be right, but then the stuff around it needs to be set up in a way that the reflect.
Not really. And then for this one, I tried my best at making a soda can. I had it before. I did it like a hole in here with using like a Boolean modifier, but I moved them. I'm not sure what happened, honestly. Yeah, honestly.
For the hole in the top of the can, that's what you're talking about?
I think it was before I like joined them, or I think maybe I joined them and it got rid of I used like a cylinder without the tube facing on top with the Boolean. But then when I moved it, I think it kept the cylinder up when I was building it up higher, and it just didn't come with. And at that point, it was too late. So.
Okay. Yeah, when you have the modifiers and you go to join, there's the whole issue of actually taking the modifiers and turning them into actual geometry, in which case then everything becomes editable and it's just part of the geometry at that point. We'll talk a little bit about that after we're done.
So,
But I like the scene. This is cool.
yeah, then I just did some regular lighting and kind of just called it there. But I guess the one question I do have is with using something like the particle texture, because I was getting, or I guess just particles, I was going to use on the trees too. But I'm wondering how heavy is that?
Potentially super heavy.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, yeah.
I was like, whatever like the count was for, I guess, how many hair particles.
Yeah.
I went from like 20,000 and I just added 1 0, and then my computer just like, kind of stopped right there.
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, we'll talk about it, not today, but later. Yeah. Yeah. Anytime you have a situation like that where you're instancing tens or hundreds of thousands of things, right? Even a little bit more computation per thing adds up a lot, right? So there's a lot of moving parts there.
Here's my video just showing my little scenes I did.
So, yeah. Like, does that look more like real grass? Yes. Is there a reason I haven't shown you that? Yes. Right? So, both the things. It's great. I'm not saying don't go out and, like, satisfy your curiosity. But, it is that you do be prepared to run up against this, right? So there's a video, I'll put it in this week's assignment, about when you're doing this kind of work or any artistic work, but in this case in particular, about increasing your capacity for the unknown. If you have a high capacity for the unknown, like you're okay with experimentation and perhaps good or bad results from experimentation, then like feel free to experiment, right? But if you have a low capacity for the unknown and you're going to be, negatively impacted by negative results, then perhaps be a little bit more conservative, right? Because it just is a situation when you're working the computer, you can end up in these situations where like, man, I just hosed this file, right? But all of you have autosave on, so you should be able to go back to a previous version of files. So that's one thing. And yeah, it's just, it's hard as a student to get into situations like this. I mean, to some extent in physical art making at the scale at which students are usually doing it. It's when you go to paint grass in a painting, you're not, you may ruin the painting. You can't unpaint the paint. You can't subtract it off the canvas, but you can't, if you paint too much grass, you're not going to set the painting on fire, right? And it's hard to even come up with a physical metaphor here for what it would be, right? So like this is possible in the computer, but that's the short answer is it possible to really slow down the computer with the grass? Yeah, absolutely, yes.
For the first one, it's going to be the outside scene. I really wanted to do like a Gravity Falls inspired thing. Originally, I wanted to do Slender Man, and then...
Yeah, so I'm late to the Gravity Falls party. My son and I just watched pretty much all of it over break, and that's fantastic. And just 2 seasons, in and out, I'm sure there's probably talk or whatever of more of it, maybe. I don't know. I haven't looked at all of that on the internet. But like in terms of like really, really compact, fun storytelling. And then, yeah, we're huge Kristen Shaw fans. Like she is so funny. Like Louise from Bob's Burgers. And who is she in Gravity Falls? She's Mabel. Yeah. And if you ever have a chance, look up her solo comedy show from like 10 years ago. That's
learned pretty quick that is not something I have the skill set to do yet. But also I did think I had way more time than I did on this, so I wasn't able to make the cabin for this one, and I wanted to do like a little Mystery Shack inspired thing. So like when you turn on the camera, you could see the Now Leaving Gravity Falls with the cabin behind it, which I thought would have been pretty cool. And some of the stuff I joined in here were obviously the trees I did, as well as this sign, which I am pretty proud of, and I learned image texture to kind of make this wood texture for it. I didn't struggle too hard on this. I found it pretty fun. The only thing that it really had me struggle on a little bit was was doing all of this in render, because sometimes my laptop would just slow down on me. It wouldn't crash, but it would just like slow Blender down for a couple seconds. But this is my bedroom scene I did. Fun fact, the way I actually made this was I took a cube, I scaled it up a little bit, and then when you go in edit mode, I selected 3 of the faces, deleted them, and I was able to get a pretty even looking floor and walls. I learned extrude as well as just duplicating like the walls over here, and that's how I made this little trim. And because I wanted to do image texture for the Gravity Falls sign, I also did it in here because I thought it would just like add a little personality to it. For the multiple light sources, I tried to do one that was like overhead up here, and then one that's like coming from the TV. And then for the stuff that was joined, it was actually these 4 little bed legs that I did. I accidentally did a Control B on them at first, which it made them look pretty crazy because it was bevel. And it was a pretty easy fix, so I didn't struggle too bad on that. But yeah, these are my 2 scenes.
Great. Good. Yeah, you got everything in there. We'll talk about the room situation there. People solve that problem in some interesting ways. Yeah, and then you've got a different sense of scale here. And then, once again, being aware of the shading, shade smooth or shade flat. And most of the time, shade auto smooth here on these cones is going to make the side of the cone look smooth, but still have an edge there at the edge of the cone. Okay, good. Very nice. Tanner.
Hello everyone, this is Tanner McMillan doing my Blender fundamentals. I've got 2 scenes prepared, so let's get into it. My first one, I continued on with my previous assignments. It turned out, I didn't read ahead or anything, I promise. It just turned out that both.
There's no book, so I don't know what
involved sort of a forest kind of theme. So I created a scene of the mountain with the trees on it. I applied materials, and I was kind of going for a like a nighttime mountain kind of look. The sun point that I used is...
Okay, so Tanner was going up into the menu there to look through the active camera. What's the shortcut to look through the camera? 0.
Been tinted blue. I'm trying to... I think I just need to work on some more of like the darkness. I don't know if there's like a darkness light that I can put over to counteract the lighting in the background, because I kind of imagined like a shadow in the background, like a blur or something maybe. My log cabin I made with an array, and then many of these trees are also an array, just like a half circle. But yeah, so I made materials for every one of them. Some of them work better than others. The cabin has a material, it's like a wood material that I made, but the lighting from the sun just kind of overpowers it, which is why I think I need some sort of I don't know, like a dimming factor on the sun. So alrighty, let's go to the interior. The interior I made is like a closet. I made like a lamp with a shelf in the background.
Nice.
I don't know how to make a object emanate light, so I kind of just applied some light points around it to make it look fluorescent.
Yeah, usually putting 4 of them around the object like that's a little overkill for this situation, but that's
and then the shelf I made just with standard, you know, these four are an array here, and then these two are not. So I built the array first and then put these two on either end.
Cool. Smart way to build the shelf. That way, if the art director comes back and says, like, we love it, we just need 5 shelves instead of 4, you just go to the array and click, and you're done, right? So the power of, procedural construction there, like our forest. The art director comes back and says, we love it, but there's too many trees. If you copy and pasted all the trees, then you're clicking and deleting trees. If you use the scatter on surface, you just...
And pretty simple, pretty basic. I kind of couldn't think of anything else. I just think that I just had the idea of like looking into a closet, like a camera looking into a closet, something like that. So yeah, thanks.
Cool, great.
Where's this emissions channel coming from that people are using?
It's just at the bottom of the material there. We'll look at that in a second when we get through here. Here's Mark. Yeah, not.
On a separate audio channel. I had multiple audio channels, and it's doing the one that doesn't have any audio playing.
You have multiple audio channels in the movie file?
Yeah, so I can. It's easier for editing, but I didn't have time to edit this.
Oh, okay.
So.
I mean, does that come through in the MP4 file?
I mean, if you like set the audio, I don't know how to set the audio channel in the MP4 file. I know there's ways of doing it with like video editors like Premiere Pro, but I don't want you to have to open this up with Premiere Pro just to view the audio.
Okay, we'll come up here and I'll hit play and you can talk.
Well, I don't want to like talk over myself, but.
Well, we can't hear your other self, so you're only talking. I don't know. It's between you and yourself. Here we go.
Hello. I wanted to record a video for you to get you settled in on my Blender projects. With this Blender, the first scene was definitely inspired by Five Nights at Freddy's. This is like the main office in the Five Nights at Freddy's. And I put together a bunch of like cubes. It's a vertical as shown by the prerequisites of the project. There's a lot of cubes used a lot, including like the fan and the cupcake. I used a subsurface division modifier to make them more round. But I didn't put any smoothing on them because I wanted to keep that low poly look, which is why everything is low poly and pixelated, because I was inspired by Nintendo 64 games and PlayStation games. But I made sure to keep all the lighting there as well. I definitely had fun messing around with the UV editing for the textures, getting it all pixelated and stuff like that, and I'd love to mess around with UV editing more in the future. And it gave everything nice, like reflective metallic textures to kind of give it that like scary look. And this is my forest scene. One thing that I would have definitely changed would have been changing the trees to a collection of trees, so I can have like different colored trees to kind of give it like more of like an autumn look. Like there's more like orange, yellow, brown, and stuff like that. The cabin is made with a bunch of cylinders, and it was inspired by Lincoln logs. And I'm sure I could have done it a little bit better, but I was a little like strapped on time at the time. And I definitely had fun using the scatter on surface modifier for the first time, trying to get all the trees to display. I kept messing around with the seed, like that changes where the trees are located, to choose a good position that had a nice open area for the log cabin where there wouldn't be a tree colliding with it. I don't know what else I started yapping about in this. And I also realized I'm very short on like the OBS thing, and I have a green shirt, so that would blend in anyway. But yeah, I had a lot of fun on this project, and I'd love to do more with Scatter on Surface.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate you coming up and doing that, me putting you on this spot there. Yeah, you chroma keyed yourself out of the video there. There's a really great gag about that in Bob's Burgers. Tina wears like a chroma key green jacket. Aren't the Masters jackets green? Is that right? I can't remember. Yeah, they're green? Yeah. Obviously, they don't use the chroma key and at that event. Yeah. It's all right. It's all right. Your full view is on the other side there, so.
I'll make sure to fix the audio problem next time.
Yeah. Just put it on the regular
exactly
channels.
what caused it, and I realized it, and like, oh man.
Yeah, really, really nice. Yeah, cool scene. This has very spooky vibe. I have not really seen any of the Five Nights at Freddy's stuff, but I have been to a physical Chuck E. Cheese's, so I think that counts. I think I can fill in the rest. Like I didn't need those movies to make it clear to me that those animatronic animals could malfunction and attack me, and so like that had occurred to me long before Five Nights at Freddy's. But I'll have to take the time to like. What it started off as a game or movie? Yeah. Game. It started off as game. All right. And now there's a movie too, right? There's a movie. There's a movie. There's a movie too, right?
Yes.
2 movies. Okay.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say the movies aren't like canon to the actual story.
Okay. Yeah. I guess I'm not super like.
Hello,
Adrian.
My name is Adrian Aguilar, and this is my present video on my scene of the indoors and outdoors for the forest and stuff like that, and of this week. Basically, for the indoors, I made a dining table where we got ourselves a vase, some chairs, and a burger. A lot of the textures in the burger grabbed from Blender Kit. Because for me it feels like more simple. Oh, how I made the chairs, I basically joined like 6 cubes that I rescaled and like shaped. And then for the base, I basically did the same, but I also used the edit tool, the edit mode, to like hollow out the cone so that you can see the bit of the inside. And then yeah, what else?
Okay, great. So good indoor scene here in terms of satisfying the requirements. But the chair issue we talked about before, ideally, based on what I showed you on Monday, the chair, to properly construct the chair, it wouldn't be a bunch of cubes. It would be a single cube that then you box modeled into the shape of a chair, which we will do exactly in a couple weeks.
Okay. Now moving on to the next one. I'll be you in a bit. For my next one is here, this forest, where basically some huts around the area. Yeah, a lot of them collide into each other or like phase into each other. Technical difficulties. This part of the project or the work was the difficult one, because for some reason when I try to scatter them around the place, it feels like basically the scatter on the surface trees, the one that are not their own mesh or whatever, became really large and just like upside down, and for me it was really difficult. And then
Okay, he made a tree, then he put it into the scatter on surface, and it changed the size. Diagnosis. What is your advice to him? What would be the issue here? Apply scale, right? you want to apply scale, apply scale, apply scale, because we want, anytime we're going to put something in the scatter on surface or an array, we want the scale to be what? 1, 1, 1, right?
Before I even applied the scatter on surface,
right, so that you don't have to do this, right? Because I'm surprised this worked. Yeah, I mean, there's the whole issue, like, what is negative scale? Like, oh, yeah. Like at that point, yeah, it flips it inside out. But then, when you start to think about that in a physics context, it's like, what?
The head boxes or the cubes, whatever, the headbox cubes were really flat. And for me, I was like, then I'm guessing they're gonna be deformed or like really bad looking for the work. The way I fixed it is just tinkering around with the scaling and stuff like that. Because this was filmed at
Right. So go back to the tree that you're referencing. Apply scale on that tree after you've gotten it the size that you want. Then probably delete the scatter on surface so that you can then start clean. So this is another thing I mentioned, but everybody in big letters in the notebook, this is hard for everyone to hear, but it's better to delete and redo than don't fix. The skill set it takes to fix things is far greater than the skill set it takes to just sort of wipe the slate clean and do it again with a better attention to detail. I can't stress that enough, especially here at the beginning. Now that I've shown you a couple 3D modeling tools, our extrude, our inner extrude, those kind of things, if you find yourself in the next month getting into a situation where you're like, I'm trying to become a mesh doctor to repair this mesh, that's the point at which you want to pull the parachute, burn down the house, and start over. It's just going to be it's going to be less time for sure, right? You can certainly get yourself into situations where it's like this is through a combination of it being complex and a combination of the program/tools not making it visually obvious what the problem is. It's very easy to get into situations where there's like hidden information that is messing up everything you're doing, and then but you can solve that situation by just deleting it all, not the whole file, but like I started modeling this thing and all of a sudden it's gone sideways on me. Like maybe you don't delete it, you just turn it off and just start again with a new one. It's going to be so much faster to do the second time because it'll be at least the second or third time you're going through it, and then it just makes it much easier to sort of figure out, if we can, what happened. There's been plenty of problems that I've run into where I've had to do the same thing, and at some point I just had to live with the fact I'm never going to know what went wrong the first time. There's just so many check boxes, and there's so many situations where you're trying to fix something and you're turning stuff on and off and you're twiddling knobs and stuff, but you can end up in a situation where you twiddled this knob and it turns out that threw the whole program into a state that messed up something else, and there's no way you would have known that. And so like this is some really good advice here at the beginning, right? Doing the mesh surgery is that's an advanced.
This video was made in February 2nd, and I finished the work like before that. That was a problem that I was dealing with scaling and stuff like that. And yeah, a lot of the trees are facing to the ground.
Yep. Okay. Well, we diagnosed that specifically, and then you start off with the other room. Okay. Awesome. Thank you, Adrian. And then I have here's Backpack.
Hi, this is Backpack. I did 2 landscape scenes. This one, the sort of standard landscape, just to satisfy the assignment. and to make sure that I understood everything. For example, I did some selections to have some autumn colors on the landscape and some white snow caps on the trees. I had a lot of trouble joining the components that made up this log cabin lookout. A lot of trouble. I would get a message that said, active object not in selection. I had a lot of trouble with seeing in the camera what the viewport is. Yeah, there's the camera view, but I want to see this wider view, and so I tried doing panoramic. I tried changing the depth of the focal length. I wasn't getting.
I mean, you either need to change the focal length or move the camera back. Those are the two. Those are the two. You want to see more of. There's two things there. So here, where's my camera? There it is. Okay, so there's the issue of how big the frame is on the screen. So here, this size. If you want the frame to fill up the entire view, not changing what's in the frame, but just make the frame itself bigger, when you press 0, press home. That just expands the frame so it's in the entire view. It's changed nothing about the render. Nothing, right? It's just expanded the existing frame so it fills up the view. If I wanted to actually see more in the camera, I've got to either move the camera, and so if we keep it in local and we move on the Y, or no, Z, then we'll see more.
So doing that, dragging the camera, you kept losing where the camera was.
Okay, the other option here is to go to view and then camera to view. So if that's on, now I'm changing where the camera is if I'm looking through the camera, if I've pressed 0. So now as I move, because if I were to do this, so if I make a second view, if you come up here in the interface and you get this little crosshair, you can pull out a second view. And so now on this one, if I look at it from the side and zoom out so we can see the camera, right? So here's the camera right there. Now over on this view, since this one is stuck camera to view, if I start to move this around, you see the camera moving over there, right? But if this is on, then every time you're moving around in the viewport, you're moving the camera, which, you know, a really good way to mess up the camera constantly, which is why I don't usually have this on. No, because if I want to see more on the camera, most of the time this is a matter of either moving the camera backwards, like we just talked about, or adjusting the camera focal length, right? So end of the camera, size. And so, you know, more or less zoomed in or zoomed out there. As long as we're looking through the camera, we would see that over on the other side there.
So do you only use the camera to view when you're ready to render or set up
I don't really use it at all. Like I do exactly what I've been showing you. I like set the camera, you know, I come find whatever I want, you know, in the viewport, you know, like, okay, I want to see it over here, Control Alt 0, you know, and then fine tune things from here.
The difference between Control Alt 0 and just 0 is?
Control Alt 0 moves the camera from wherever it is to where you're looking in the viewport. 0 leaves the camera object and takes you to where the camera is.
Right, okay.
Control Alt 0 is an active edit. 0 changing, just looking through the camera where it is now. Okay, so Control Alt 0 is like you moving the camera. 0 is just you looking through the camera.
Great, thank you. The view that I wanted to see. The birch forest, the second one that I did was because I really wanted to try to model this idea of the birch tree forest, which is the firefighter's heaven. is a birch forest because birch trees don't burn. Well, that's only partly true, but they're slow burn. So I did the trees the same way as I did cables for the space station that I'll pull up next, but it's just basically extruding on a point, making branches, and then adding a skin modifier. I just followed a bunch of YouTube videos. I don't have experience in it yet. And the HDRI, yeah, I'm going to bring that in because this is all about the art for me. I really love bringing in the background landscapes, HDRIs. The plane I didn't model. I just really wanted to do birch trees. And the next one will be the portrait view, which is, I try to think about what it is that would be an interior that would be vertical in a portrait sort of format. So I thought about the space station. I thought about a number of things like airplane bathroom and cockpit, stuff like, you know, things that would be more vertical. And then I went with the space station. So this is I saw a video of Suni Williams demonstrating what it was like to be have an anti-gravity sleep experience. So that's what that is. Yeah, I brought in an HDRI because I really want to make it art. And these are just subdivision surfaces that I just extruded, and the wires, cables, I did the same way as I did the trees. So that's that. Yeah, I really got to go over, we got to do some camera stuff. Hi, this is Backpack. I did 2 landscapes. So I did the...
Yeah, it looks great. I mean, these work here. I mean, it looks like there's at least 2 different trees, right? 7 different trees? Okay, that's plenty. I mean, my usual advice in this kind of thing, like we did before, usually 3 different variations, and you put them in the scatter on surface, like that. That's usually enough to get you there. Yeah.
I just didn't like each one. I kept doing them, and I liked one. I actually made a lot more and deleted them.
Uh-huh.
I was trying to figure out that way to do it.
Yeah, I mean here, like the thing that looks the easiest thing here would just more random height scale in the scatter on surface.
With this, I didn't have a lot of height variation, but with some of the ones that I'm seeing, some people seem to have figured out how to make the trees straight, aligned with the Z axis, and some of them they're not. So is that...
Yeah, we can look at that here. We're going to look at a couple other things with the scatter. Yeah.
It's in the scatter somewhere.
Yeah. And here's Kevin's.
Hello, this is our second assignment. I guess not our first assignment. So, in any case, this is my forest, as you can tell, unrendered. Got trees. I have some hills, etc. I've got my log cabin back here, and rendered. The color looks nice. You can see if I take the light, kind of looks kind of nice looking at the light this way. Anyway, so fun project.
Great job. Yeah, rotating the sunlight. Everyone's got that down in their notes, right? Rotate sunlight, move point.
Hard.
Why does it keep doing that?
Hello.
Probably because it's in the other one.
I'll save that. Okay. I use mostly cubes to create these cubes. I resized them. I did use the cylinder to create these lights, and I'll show you in a second what the lights do. So if I go to my render, you'll see I put some lights here. I didn't really know how to put shades over the lights, so I put one up in the ceiling. I have a drop ceiling using cubes. I have an open window over here, and I did put 3 walls plus a ceiling. I was gonna keep it open here, Because I did this picture in landscape, it made my being a portrait picture a little bit harder. This was a lot of fun as well. I learned how to do this this loop cut on the chairs and on the table to make those, and so this worked out well. Subdivided the floor so I could have a raised floor here in the middle, and then of course I used accents on the walls, different colors, to add some kind of fun to it. In any case, that is my project for today.
Cool, great. Did you, with painting the walls these different colors, were you referencing anything specific there? No. Okay, like the all of the examples for the rendering technique of global illumination are in rooms with like different color walls like this. It just looks like that. Yeah, so you'll see this in a bunch of CG documentation. They always put like a reflective ball in these rooms with these different color walls, so you can see the color of the walls are actually influencing the color of the internal color there. Yeah, and then so to create the raised floor, you made a cut here and a cut here, and then extruded.
Actually, no. I gridded.
Oh, okay, and then selected.
And then I just select the ones in the middle and pull them up.
That's fine. That's just as good in that instance.
I do have a question on the cabin.
Yes.
So I used array. Created 3 walls. Then the 4th wall, which is in the face, to get the door. I didn't just use a whole wall because I didn't know how to cut a door. So I used a little array, and then another array. So all of a sudden I had 5 cylinders. That I tried to join them, they wouldn't join. I don't know why they wouldn't join. So I just left them and colored them in individually, one at a time. But it worked. But it'd been nice if I could have joined them. And I don't know if you know how, if we know how to do that.
For something at the scale of the log cabin, unless you're going to make 1,000 log cabins, not joining them is the better strategic decision. Okay, so and then in terms of cutting the hole for the door, yeah, we'll get to that.
Yeah,
but
I figured out how to cut a hole in a wall so I could have the window. I figured that one out.
Yeah. So I mean, we know about joining now, but my point was not that everything needs to get joined. Like it'll become clearer as we continue to go, like when you want to join and when you don't want to join, because it does close off, that you're kind of making a decision at which point you can't go back past it in order to make edits.
Like
So
in my room, I left the floor and all the walls and the ceiling separate. I didn't join them because I thought I might want to move them later, and it might be easier to move them.
yeah,
If I don't join them.
not joining is always the more artistically flexible decision. Okay, but there's some instances technically where you'd want to join things if you're going to duplicate them a bunch, like we did with the trees. Exactly. Yeah. Right. So my point is not always join all the stuff. To boil it down, because you are, it's a destructive process, right? Like in terms of ceramics, you're taking the thing, you're putting it in the kiln. You can't undo that at that point, right? You can't go back. And so, I mean, we can always Control Z our way back. It's not, entropy like it exists in the physics, but like, yeah. And last but not least, here is Isaac's.
Hello everyone, I'm Isaac, and this is my submission for the Week 2 Blender Fundamentals assignment. Starting off with our outdoor scene, I didn't have too much trouble with this project. I think just outside
Nice A-frame cabin, looks very
of figuring out one thing in particular, which I'll get to later, that this is my outdoor scene. I use, scatter on surface, the whole shebang of what we needed to accomplish. The cabin here, I wanted to use just a slight reference to those triangle hut cabins, and
A-frame, right? Looks like.
I think it turned out pretty all right for the most part. Here's the arrays, the again, just adding stuff, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't.
Yeah. So here, depending on what you wanted to do, if you had a door here, right, you wouldn't need to. You can actually just put the door. You wouldn't be able to open the door, or because there'd be no hole there. But this works if it's just going to be that, right? So this is one of those. This is a good example of like knowing artistic. Do I need this door to open? Is there going to be an animation where like the door opens and we go inside the cabin? Okay, well that's going to change the way I model this. Do I just need a wide shot of the cabin with a closed door? Well, then I don't need to worry about cutting the hole and everything else. It's just putting the door in front of the thing, right? What can you get away with here, right? In some instances, it does make sense to be informed by the way that things are manufactured in the real world, but always trying to reproduce that exactly in 3D is, in many instances, the most labor-intensive way to make.
And using the HDR and sun setting lightings to get like that sort of sunset effect. And there's no behind to the outdoor here, or not the outdoor, the cabin indoor, but we don't worry about that because you're not seeing it from that perspective. And moving on to the indoors, here's my composite image. Here's another composite image. And then here's another composite image, technically, I guess. I used the scatter on surface. It's supposed to be like a little fairy light string thingy. But yeah. The thing that I was talking about, the light effect, or like lighting, I was trying to make the first ever Blender file I made was like this box lantern, and I was trying to figure out how to get it to illuminate itself or just like have its own sort of glow effect in place of like taking the lighting, or wherever the light is, taking the lighting and moving it over to the box to try and give that. It's supposed to be a box lamp. I was trying to make it glow, and I'm not sure how, but I turned on ray tracing and that seemed to fix the issue, but I know that there's got to be something else to it. There's got to be a different way of doing it. But I like how it's turning out over here, so I just left it. And yeah, I would say just I wanted to deck out the place. There was supposed to be a ladder, but I reached a flow state and then found out I didn't have enough time to do that. And yeah, this is what it looks like. No questions from me so far, and turns out I didn't have many errors or problems making this. Woohoo!
Okay, looks great. Yeah, you got that inside warm cabin feel. I mean, turning on the ray tracing checkbox is sort of the first part of that, so that's good. So here's a bit based on what we were talking about before. So the in understanding normals and backface calling. If you understand those, you can construct a room like Brianna was talking about before, where we can always look in through the walls, but have it be a sealed area. And having it being a sealed area means that light would be contained inside of it. So, for instance, if I Shift A and make a new cube here, and then I change the size of this cube to something like a room, I don't know, 15 meters. Okay, there we go. Now, if I were to, let's turn this on. I'm going to get rid of this light for now, and I'm going to Shift A and make a sunlight. Okay, and we'll just rotate that so it's off to the side. Okay, and then I'm going to move this up so it's kind of sitting on the floor, and then I'm going to go ahead and tab into edit mode and grab the top and just move the ceiling down, GZ, a little bit. So it's kind of like that. Okay. Now, if we were to go back to solid view here and then turn on our face orientation. There we go. From the outside, it looks fine. If I go inside, it's red. What is the red telling me here again? This is the back side. Remember, each face has only, it faces in a direction, right? Again, without this on, it's easy to think of these as pieces of paper, which have two sides. And to make a room here, we can sort of exploit the knowledge about normals here in rendering only one side of them and come up with a room that's sealed. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this cube and I'm going to turn it inside out by reversing the normals. And so I can tell I'm doing this because I have the face orientation checked. And so now if I tab into edit mode, or I'm already in edit mode, I grab all the faces and then I go all the faces and then I go to mesh normals flip. Okay, I said reverse normals, flip normals, same thing. Now the cube is inside out, right? And so still, if I put something inside of it, because, right, I'm going to tab back out and put it in a different, make a new object. So my new object here is a UV sphere, which I can't see for the most part. GZ, there we go. It's inside the room, right? But if I go inside the room, okay, this is better in that I'm inside, right? I've moved the camera inside the cube now, right? And instead of it being red inside, it is now gray, right? Because this is the faces are facing the interior of the cube. And now here's the final part of this. If I come over here and I turn on back face culling, now I have a situation where as I rotate around, I'm able to see into the room because we're not seeing the walls that are faced this way, right? And so this allows me to have a room completely continuous, right? If I go into wireframe mode here, I have not deleted any of the faces of the room, but now it's just that when the back side of them is facing the camera, they are invisible, right? This is what the term here, if you understand the term, it communicates exactly what's happening. Back face culling, right? Culling is a synonym for killing or removing, right? We have gotten rid in the render stage of the faces that are facing the opposite direction. So this is a combination of the main things here were make cube, and this serves as the room. Then I flipped normals in order to have the walls and floor and ceiling face inside. Then, I turned on face orientation. That's kind of just for you, right? Face orientation makes the back of them red. But the thing that really makes the back face invisible is turning on back face culling. And so another thing I might write down in my notes is back face culling by default in Blender is off. This allows people to really construct the mental model of faces being two-sided things. However, this is one of the things that we face, pun intended, all the time in, someone laughed at that, thank you, AVC 200, is that we take stuff in Blender and we put it into Unity. In Unity, the game engine, back face culling is on by default. And so people will make things in Blender, they'll bring them into Unity, and they're like, hey, I look at it and parts of it are invisible. That's because they're inside out or facing the wrong direction, something like that. There's ways to adjust all of this in both programs, but this is something you need to understand, right? You can fix it in a variety of ways when it's a problem, or this is a really good example of exploiting this situation in order to, in order to create something that works really well from a, interior perspective here, right? We're able to make this room and now I'm able to move around, right? If I move the camera to here by pressing, I want to move the camera to this view. Control, Alt, 0. There we go, right? And so now if I render this view, we get that. We have to turn on backface calling in the render. And so anytime I have to search, you know, if I'm like, oh, I don't know where that is, I search the thing. I think that used to be on in default, right? So this is one of those instances where like, oh, we're doing it in the viewport, but we're not doing it in the render. Is there another thing here? No. I think they changed it. Let me look. Does anyone know off the top of their head where the backface calling button is in the render view? As usual, we're one checkbox away from success. I'll put a screenshot of it in the assignment. It's just one thing we need to check to make sure it also happens in the render. Unfortunately, these things are not super obvious in the settings. I'll come back to it. We're pressed on time. But the concept, you know, it'll be the same, so we can get the render to match here. Again, we've gotten ourselves into a non-WYSIWYG situation, which is, you know, frustrating. Okay, so now we've got this. Okay, the lighting situation. So now that this is an enclosed box, it allows us to do this. So if we tab into edit mode on the cube, which is now the room, and I were to Control R and do something like this, there we go, and then Control R and do something like that, there we go, and then tab, you know, come over here, and I'm just going to delete this face to create a hole, right? And so now we have this hole there. And so for right now, everybody, here's one area that I would encourage you not to explore. Do not put glass in the window. It's just a hole for now, okay? It's a lot more to say there. If you want to put some stuff there to cast shadows, that's fine, but don't try and make it, putting a glass texture on it will not mean the light goes through it like glass. It's a separate, there's other issues there. But now we have our sunlight. Let's come back to render view. There we go. Let's put the camera inside the room. And so I'm going to look at this and look at my sphere right about there. Control Alt 0. There we go. And now this is one of those issues or situations where, again, making two views may be useful here, where I'm working over here but looking through the camera over here. There we go. Over here. There we go. And so I've got that. Over here, I want to be in render view. Over here, in order to, you know, not having two, remember, more expensive, faster, fastest. And once you make two render views, then this matters twice as much, right? So over here, I'll stay in solid view. Let's go to our sun. Here. Tab out. There we go. In object mode. That's why I wasn't getting that. And rotate this like so. Turn up our strength a whole bunch. And if we were to look over here from outside, let's rotate it around. There we go. It's we have sun shining on this wall, but it's not coming inside the room. Okay. And so if we want the sun to come into the room, Let's go up to 1, 7. There we are on top. There we go. So now we can see we have light coming into the room through the hole, but this is the default, and this is no bouncing. So in the real world, we shine a light, the light comes out of the source, and it hits stuff. Then it bounces off that stuff and hits more stuff, and this continues, for quite a bit, right? Infinitely to some extent. But this does not happen by default in computer graphics. Why? Calculating each of those light bounces would be expensive. It's possible to do some of those bounces, and this concept of bouncing light is called global illumination. Those of you paying attention to video games, right, in the past 5-ish years, it's now possible to do this to some extent in real time in games. And so this is an option. If you've got a really great machine, you can check this box and your game will look even better. And so now we can also do it in real time, right? Because we're in a real-time render situation here in Eevee. So if I come over to the renderer and then over here, ray tracing. Isaac talked about checking this box. If you unfold under ray tracing, there is, this thing is already checked, but sort of grayed out because it's not on. If I check ray tracing, watch what happens on the left. Give it a second to do its thing, and then also give it a second to turn on. There we go. Boom. See what happened? First of all, it took a second for it to happen. That's relevant information. As soon as you see this, you're like, oh, that looks way better. Like, that's what people would want in the majority of situations. Why is that not the default? Because it's, possible now in a lot of situations, but still not super cheap, right? So it's not on by default. You got to remember, especially with Blender, which the idea is that people want to be able to run it on any computer, which we know is not the reality, but they want it to be available, right? And so they make the defaults fast, but perhaps not high fidelity. So this is a checkbox that, checking this one box, allows the light to bounce some. The light bouncing is a setting that you can get into, like right here, steps and rays. I hesitate to even, don't forget about that. Don't even look at it. Close that, right? Just the default GI settings are going to be fine for now. But now we have a situation where now as I move the sunlight around, you'll see that we get something that looks, way more high fidelity here, right? And there's two reasons for this. One is we have GI, which when we click the ray tracing button, remember GI is the abbreviation for global illumination. There we go. And that gets turned on when you check that ray tracing button. There's more to say about this. Stay tuned. But sunlight doesn't come in that sharp all the time. Yeah. Like I think if it's not that important, I think this will do it. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so the angle on the sunlight. But it'll get a little weirder. And so this is. So it's a memory and system hog. Is what it is. I mean, just checking the box, the default settings should run okay. You should be able to continue to work and have it be fine. It's possible to crank it up to the point where even if you have a fast machine, it'll be slow. But the default settings are okay, right? If you turn it on and then you find your computer slowing down to the point where it's hard to work, well then you have to just uncheck it, do some work, and then come back and check it again, and then you can check in with what's happening. The second thing reason this is working is because now light is bouncing. And so it is better to have this closed box rather than doing the thing that a lot of you, correctly and intuitively did this week, which is like, I'm just going to delete the wall, right? So that I can look into the box. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. You didn't know about the stuff that I just showed you right now. But now, and what we were doing last week, most of you didn't have light bouncing turned on. So it didn't even matter, right? It wouldn't have made a visual difference. But now, if we close the walls, are able to do the backface culling, now there's stuff for the light to bounce off of. And so that matters to some extent there. And so, yeah, now it's possible to light the scene, right? If I had like a midday, lots of windows sort of room, right over here, right? Lots of windows here. In our case, is going to end up being just more holes, right? So Control R, like that, and click, and then here. And so I'll make some more windows here, here, and sure, there. And so look through the press home, blow that up, right? And so now if I move the camera maybe over here, Control Alt 0, grab the camera object itself, make sure I get back to object mode, grab the camera over here, make the focal length lower so that I see more of the room at one point. And so now I'm getting light coming in here into the room like so. And then, yeah, that's if I press, well, the camera is in the room now. And so now if I render, that's fine. And then we're just one checkbox away in terms of the backface culling not showing in the render itself. But yeah, okay. Does it make sense why this works when we do, if we come out of this over here, I made a new view and probably need to reset it. There we go. Why this is the case, why this works, right? Because we've turned it inside out and the things are facing the other direction.
So why do people use this, like for interior design or something? Or trying to figure out why do this?
Yeah, I mean, here, like this works in this sort of making one room. Yeah, if you're designing a house, you would probably have inside and outside walls there, right? They would have thickness. We're not doing that in this case, right? Yeah. So, in terms of like actually visualizing house stuff, the architecture programs work slightly differently, but there's like handoff technology there. But they would come in with walls on both sides. But in this case, it works for our one room scenarios. I would not use this technique for an entire house, right?
Video games and stuff.
Yeah, video games, they would leverage this idea. And it also makes me make sure that you understand what normals are. So that's one of our primary aims here. Remember, the normal angle, this idea that it's a 90-degree arrow pointing out from the center of the face, right? And in only one direction. Right? It's not going in both directions from the center. Okay, so setting up the room there, that would help improve everybody's room. Good. Make sure I have the on, right? And so now, if we're looking at this here, I could also put lights in this room. So there's a GZ, there's a point light. And so now if I move the light up to the ceiling, I turn off the sunlight and I just have my point light on and start to turn this up. Again, I get way more naturalistic settings, this versus that. So there's a bunch of things here. The global illumination allows things to bounce off. Also, you see this darkening that happens here in the corners. This is referred to, I would write this down in my notes, as ambient occlusion. This is a rendering phenomenon, just a light phenomenon that in corners, it gets darker because it's, harder, but the light gets trapped in there or never gets there in the first place. And so this idea that essentially it's a way of sort of like darkening, not dorkening, that's different, the, nooks and crannies of different objects. Helps the detail really speak there, the ambient occlusion. It's a type of shadowing that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the directionality of the light source, just sort of the more of the geometry of the object. And so once you turn on global illumination, then some of what we were talking about before with the material emission will work for lighting. So for instance, but you still want to use light objects in order to light your scene. You want to use light objects, okay? However, once you start using GI, then the emission channel on a material will contribute, okay? Not totally take over, but contribute to the lighting. So for instance, if I duplicate the sphere, there we go, and then I put a material on this one, there we go, and I call this glow. Now, we talked about color, metallic, and roughness, just very cursorily. But down here, there's a bunch of other stuff. Just weight. All of these things are really dependent on a bunch of other things being set up to be effective. The other one that matters here from the beginning is emission, right? And so this is more like it's going to, light objects, things that are self-lit. And so if I open this up, there's two things, the strength and the color. And so if I start turning this up, you can see it does contribute to the scale, the lighting in the scene. If I go ahead and move it closer to the ground. However, you may notice this is like flickier, more flickery and noisy. Okay, so this is the balancing act of global illumination. Okay, for right now, this week, just absorb the basic functionality of global illumination. Light bounces. That's great. However, it comes at a cost. The cost is computation, and the visual cost is noise. In order to compute this stuff in a way that is reasonably fast, it needs to be done in a way where you end up with this noise. There's different ways to address that. We'll talk about that stuff later. Do not spend this week worrying about your image being too noisy and trying to solve that problem, because there's a lot to say there. Okay, just again, absorb and embrace the noise right now, because there's a whole issue there. Notice that the light from the light source is much less noisy than the light coming from the emission channel, right? And so it's primarily functioning here to light up this thing. But the color matters, and so now you can see that contributes to these other things. Not only does the color matter for the emission, but the color matters for the objects themselves. So, for instance, now if I were to go to my room, tab into edit mode, grab this face here, and make I want to assign that, and so let's make a new material here, just red, not emission red, just base color red. There we go. And another one. There we go. In here. Tab out. Right, and so just making this red, let's turn off this pink sphere. There we go. Now I have red light here, red light here. Now this is, you know, a result of this wall being partially red, right? Again, no emission happening at all now. Just the fact that we've colored this changes the fidelity of what's happening here, right? So global illumination, good. For right now, just check the box and enjoy it. Don't try to fine tune everything, because this is another one where reducing the noise is a whole topic, and fiddling with the knobs can really tank the render time. So that's under rendering, ray tracing, turning that on. By default, fast GI, again, this is a really great explanation of exactly what we're doing here. This is a fast GI approximation, right? It's not physically correct global illumination. It just looks good enough, and it's fast. And so those are both big. And then also EV, we're in EV. Don't change, you know, if you changed it, change it back. Good, okay. So a little bit about the interior room there. Let's go ahead and save this, save as, room. Okay, and save that. And then let's come back over to there. Okay, here. Let's address the other issue here. Scatter on surface is great. Everyone likes that. But the main thing is more controllable, right? This is trying to figure this kind of thing out really helps level up what you're doing. I'm able to use procedural tools, but arc direct them enough to have control over the resulting image, right? I want trees. I want to be able to procedurally create a forest, but I want to do it here and not there. And so we can do this two ways, and they both will speak to two concepts we need to understand, which is the first one is a vertex group. And so this is just exactly what it says, a way to save a selection of either vertices, faces, or edges to some group of things. And then the second thing here is weight painting. And this is essentially more data per vertex. And so each vertex is itself a piece of data, right? It has a location, X, Y, and Z. I showed you those in a spreadsheet, right? Over here. There you go. So here's all the vertices in the tree, right? It's just each vertex has a distinct identifying number. It's just a spreadsheet, right? X, Y, and Z. However, the spreadsheet, we live in a three-dimensional world, so having three dimensions is necessary to represent three-dimensional worlds. However, you could have as many spreadsheet columns as you want. And so we can expand the spreadsheet to store additional data. And one of those things can be a weight. What is a weight? It's just a number, right? We can access that number to do a bunch of things. One of the things you often do is that you use this in character rigging to control how much influence a bone has over a mesh, right? It's just an influence number. It's essentially a multiplier. But it's just a number, and you can have multiple other numbers stored with each vertex here. Everything comes down to just a spreadsheet of data and knowing when you're accessing which part of the spreadsheet. So if we come back over here, let's do that one first, the weight painting. And so where does the data need to exist, right? We want to be able to control which vertices on the plane, right? And so because the plane is the thing that we are scattering upon. And so here's the plane. I'm going to tab into edit mode. And here I can select my individual faces. And over here, we've been using tab mostly to go back and forth between object and edit mode, but I'm sure some of you have used and already looked at. There are other modes over here. And one of the modes to look at here is weight paint. And so if we go into weight, right, so you usually have to go to edit mode, right, because if I'm in object mode and I click this, no, it's there. If I go to weight paint mode, I have this. Let me delete that one. There we go. Okay, yeah. I just want it to be blank for right now. And so this is going to be, when we make a new, grouping or weight painting here, it's going to, at the top, have something available, and we name this. I'm going to call this forest area. And spell that correctly. There we go. And so now, as long as we have the brush tool here, we can paint onto this. Now, what are these colors telling us? It's hue mapped here, and so red is going to be the dense areas, and then blue is the cold areas, right? And so in terms of the value, when we do weight painting or any of these other pieces of data that we store in the spreadsheet, it's usually normalized data. What does that mean? It means it goes between 0 and 1, right? And so in our case, 0, for when you're weight painting, 0 is blue, and 1, or it might be black, it's dark, and then 1 is red. And as you hue shift from here to here, then it's going up from 0 to 1, okay? And then part of the advantage of having normalized data is that it's very easy to map this onto any other range, just simply, by multiplying it by whatever value you need. A little bit about the brush. By default, we're painting at maximum strength, and then there's the size of the brush. Those are the two main things to control right now. Now, as I'm painting, you'll notice that this looks really choppy, right? Because the data, as I'm painting the weights here, we are painting weights onto vertices. And so it's quantized to the vertex, right? We can't paint, we can interpolate in between vertices, but the data is, constrained to that. Anyways, I've painted some data here, right? And so these red areas are hot. This is where it'd be a high value, and the blue areas are cold. Okay, great. But it's not doing anything to the trees. How do I make it do something to the trees? All we've done is paint the data and stored it on the plane. If we come back to object mode and go over to, make sure we have the plane selected, and we go to data. Yeah, so up here we have forest area, right? Now this, in the data tab here, right, we have more data per thing. Can we see it in geometry nodes? I'll figure out where that is for next week and show it to you. Great. And so now let's go to the modifiers and to the scatter on surface. And over here, I'm going to go to the density mode. And then this little icon here, this is telling you that this parameter, whatever it is, you can use a singular value, or if you press this button, you can use a vertex map, some sort of data to control this, right? Because this density value here is just over the entire thing. But what if we didn't want it to be all over the entire thing? And actually, I think the easier way to do this is actually put the weight painting on the distribution mask. And so here, I'll click this one. And if we look at this one, why is it not giving me the menu? Did I not store it on the thing? Mine last night was giving me the option here. Why is it not giving me the option? It's going over there. That data is actually not there. Because we call it our data forest area. There we go. Let me do it from scratch just to make sure. Yeah, it was working at the end there, but like there was a inscrutable amount of clicking to get to that. So let's just do it so that I have reproducible steps for you guys. Scatter on surface. What do we want to scatter? Collection, trees, realize instance, or no, pick instance. There we go. Okay, and then here, distribution mask. There we go. That worked correctly. So it was blank. Then I clicked into the area, and then I can see whatever I named my group. You should name your group. Should be here. Okay, so there'll be some other stuff, and we want forest area. Cool. And notice that I'm in density random. Now I can dial up the density, and it's being mapped to the area I want. And so here I'm getting trees in my building. I don't want trees in my building. You're going to need to make a building this week, and so we don't want trees in the building. Last week we just sort of ignored the fact that there are trees in our cabin. This week we can address that. How do we address that now? Now it's reading this data here, right? And so this is a really great art directable procedural setup. We're using density and random, and then here we can make the forest less dense or more dense, but it's being constrained by the distribution mask here. And if I come back to the plane, go back to weight paint mode, make sure I'm in forest area here. Okay, and so I've got, there's some blue here. Yeah, so black is 0. And I want to erase. So I'll take the weight down to 0. So I'll paint 0, essentially erase from the mask. And so there, if I come over here and just erase some of these areas, I should be able to get it to the point where now the trees are not in the building. If the art director comes back and says, like, we love it, but we just don't want any trees in the valley. Well, now I can, again, I'm painting 0 here. I can sort of get this to the point where there's no, make sure the valley is black. And so it's fairly low resolution where I'm painting. If I want to have trees over here in this area, I turn it back up to 1 and I'm painting here. So now the resolution of the geometry, the topology matters for the weight painting. And so it might be worth it to maybe have one more subdivision in the plane itself. So some of you have your plane more subdivided or less subdivided. So if I go back into edit mode, I grab all of the edit mode and grab all the, make sure I have the plane there. Just on the plane. Edit mode, there we go. All the faces, right click, subdivide. There we go. So I subdivided with the tool, right, which is a destructive subdivision. And so now if I come back to weight paint mode, watch how weight paint mode works now. Now you see that it's more high fidelity. I'm able to sort of control with greater precision where there's stuff and where there's not, right? And so essentially if I paint a weight of 1, I get very dense trees. If I paint 5, I get a medium density of trees. If I paint a 0, I erase trees. And so now I can create a situation where I've got trees where I want them and trees not where I don't want them. But still be able to, figure out where I want trees and then adjust the density, to sort of do whatever I would want in that instance. And where are the weights being stored? On the plane. Plane. And so the, select plane, go to weight painting mode, paint forest, and then you have to, in the distribution mask, parameter of the scatter on surface, this is where you select the weight paint group, whatever it is that you named it. So name it something clear. You can have multiple sets of weights per object and use them for different purposes. And so this is an instance where understanding the underlying, data structure of what's happening, I think helps you understand what's going to happen here. So as you're looking through the interface, keep your eye out for these little icons, right? Not every parameter is something that you can feed weight data into for a variety of reasons, but some of them you can, and it really opens up a new idea, right? In terms of, instead of applying a modifier to the entire object, what if we applied the modifier to portions of an object? Or what if we applied parts of the modifier strongly in one part of the object and weakly in another part of the object? It'd be another way to address that.
So it's called a mask because you're masking something that's actually there, that's still in the model, but it's...
it generates random points all over the thing and then, masks them according to this. But it's not like it renders all of the trees and then takes the other trees away. Like it does it in a way where it's doing it efficiently. It's not, The idea of generating random points on the plane is computationally easy. It's the rendering of the tree at that point, which is a thing that would be expensive. And so, the people who design it take that into account. But yeah, you can think of it in terms of masking like in Photoshop.
Like they're really, or substance painters, I was thinking of they're really in the cabin, but you're masking it. They may really be in the cabin, but you're just masking it.
Yes, really be. They may really be in the cabin. That's doing a lot of work in that sentence there. I don't know. There's we could debate that for a while. But yeah, it's data, and then we're thinning out that data somehow. Yeah. It just depends on whether you want to think of it as additive or subtractive, right? Do I have a big thing that I'm whittling down, or do I have an empty thing that I'm filling up? Either way, you end up with the similar result here. Okay. Let's see. 20 minutes here. One other thing. Let's save this. Let's look over here. You know, I'll have you guys build, I don't know, two or three different, you know, high-rise-ish buildings, right? Similar to the thing I made in class, right? Tweaking it a little bit. I'll talk about this throughout the semester. The 80-20 rule, I apply this in many, many different areas. One of them would be, especially at the beginning of the semester, how creative should I get? We've all seen really great video games and really great computer graphics. And so you've got a lot of really, really great ideas. You can increment them. You can apply and create them incrementally here. If you are sticking to what we did in class, about 80%, and then like adding 20% of a twist, that's a successful strategy. When you start to go way off there into the unknown, then that can be more problematic, right? So think about how to make a building that's kind of like the building we made, right? Not modeling Taipei 101 down to the detail, right? Something like that. Did you guys watch that guy, Alex Honnold, climb Taipei 101? He did that on Netflix like last week, the week before, something like that. The guy who free soloed in Yosemite. Yeah, he climbed Taipei 101 in, no ropes. So one thing to be, I wanted to specifically call out here, Z fighting. This is when we have two faces in exactly the same location. Again, in the real world, we don't run into this because you can't have the same matter in the same space at the same time for the most part. Overlapping planes. This becomes a problem at render time because there's two things in exactly the same place, and the computer's like, which one is in front? Which one should I render there? And this creates problems. And you can run into this in a variety of ways, but in particular, once you start using the extrude and the inner extrude tool. Let me show you where this happens a lot. So if I inner extrude here at the top, and then I press E for extrude, like so, that's good. And so the thing a lot of students, or the thing that happens now is people will press E again, and they'll go the opposite way, in like this. And this right here, depending on the view level, we'll see it, is that, there we go. Blender will show it to you like this. This sort of aliased striations that you're seeing on all of the selection here, I pressed A to select all. This is Z fighting. It means that now we have overlapping faces, right? Because we extruded the whole way up to here and then back down, and so there's like two faces in this location right there. So if I wanted to make some other spire or something here that goes down in, the better technique is to inset, even if it's very, very slight, then extrude in, right? If I wanted to make an inset of some kind here. Now, even though it's very thin, this is offset from this, and so there's no Z fighting now. Everything is clearly separated. And so that's comes up often here at the beginning, right? When you learn about extrude and inner extrude, is that you do this, and that results in Z fighting. But now that you know what it looks like, keep an eye out for that while you're editing, right? If you get to this point, stop what you're doing, Control Z, back a step, and figure out what is overlapping there. This is one thing we want to avoid. Because, again, it's just a fundamental render issue there. Two things in the same place. What do I render? Most of the time it results in like flickering or, I mean, just some sort of render problem because the computer's not sure which one to show there. Then the other thing we can do here is make a rock for our other scene. So in this case, we're going to use the we'll do this in a couple steps here. We're going to use the subdivision surface twice. And so we're going to use the subdivision surface first to just create a round base geometry, which we will then manipulate with brushes, be able to just move the points around more like they're goo, more like it's clay. And then we'll use a second sub D surface to smooth out the result. The key that we're going to do here is that after we do this first step, we are going to convert to mesh. This will be the new wrinkle here, in that we'll take a modifier and then we'll take, by converting it to a mesh, we will essentially eliminate the modifier, but take the geometry that the modifier created and make it editable, right? We are using a similar situation right now on the forest ground, in that we subdivided it and we edited those subdivisions, and then we used a subdivision surface to smooth it out more. We're going to be doing a similar sort of thing. So I've got a cube, but in order to make a rock, just sort of like a general, very basic, just sort of irregular organic shape, right? Unlike the pretty geometric stuff that we've made up until now. And so if I take a cube, I come over to modifiers, I look for sub D surface, and if I put a sub D surface on a cube, watch what happens. Boom. It starts to move towards sphere, right? And move it closer towards sphere, the more I crank up this. How much do we want to crank this up? How much geometry do we want at any time ever? Just enough. Very good. And so we know not to just, crank it up and hope for the best. We want just enough. And so I'm going to go 2. 2 looks good for now. Okay. And so how do I turn this on? Because if I go into edit mode, the geometry here that's been created by the sub D surface is not available to me, right? Watch. I'll tab into edit mode, and it's the original sphere, because this subdivision is being created procedurally by the subdivision surface modifier. And so if I come in and grab an individual point, you'll see it's adjusting, but I can't grab these points because they're being created by the modifier. But I want to be able to grab these points. How do I do that? I have to convert to mesh. This is the command I use. You'll also, the conception, you end up with the same result if you apply the modifier. I just usually use convert to mesh because if I have a modifier stack, it's converting the entire stack, which is usually what I'm doing. Both of these things, right? What you should write down in your notes is that this and this give you the same result. This one you could apply per modifier. This one will just apply all of the modifiers, which is what I want to do 90% of the time. So if I right click on this and say convert to mesh, watch what happens. This remains unchanged. What happened over here? The modifier is gone. But if I go into edit mode, now I have access to that geometry that was created by the modifier. And so I used the modifier to sort of get me in the ballpark. Now I have a better base mesh to use. And another reasonable question here is, you started with a cube and you made a sphere. Why not just start with the sphere? this topology is different than either of the default spheres. Remember, there's the UV sphere, which is in the polar orientation, where we have a grouping of vertices, a lot of triangles at the top, or there's the icosahedron, which is all triangles. And as we discussed before, if you had to pick a type of face from which to construct your mesh, which is generally the best choice? What's the best kind of face? A quad, exactly, right? And so look at this sphere. It is constructed of quads. Even this one on the corner here, we're like, oh, that's kind of a triangle. Is it? Nope, it's a quad, right? A quad doesn't mean it's perfectly square in shape. It just means it has 4 edges, okay? And so we've created, this is a really good base mesh to use in many instances, right? You can use this to start modeling a head because we have these like 4 sides to it. It just, it's very useful. Okay, so great. Now I want to turn this into a rock. It just looks like a ball right now. But I want to, grabbing individual points and moving those around to sort of get to a rock shape is going to be a pretty unintuitive way to do this, right? And so once we are in this form, we can use some of these sculpting tools, okay, in order to manipulate these in a more natural way. So with the cube selected, which now I will rename to rock, I will tab back into object mode, then come over to the sculpting view. Okay, so the sculpting view here. What we're doing this week is we're just grabbing some vertices naturally and moving them around, okay? We're not going to be sculpting tiny rock detail or anything like that this week, okay? Because the sculpting tools are going to be limited to the geometry that we have here. And also, there's a lot of like really interesting looking tools down here, and we're only going to use mostly one. So right here, grab. Grab is fairly useful. And so if we grab, the F key allows you to change the size of your brush. And now you can grab faces and sort of move them in and out as in a much more naturalistic way, right? Because you're not grabbing one and only one vertex. What it's doing is it's grabbing, these vertices within here and then gradually fading out the effect towards the edge of the brush. And so this makes it much more naturalistic. It makes it easier to sort of manipulate in the way that you would manipulate, a piece of clay. Takes away a lot of the abstraction of doing things, right? And so we have this, and you see you can sort of form something that looks like much more irregular. Getting to this shape by selecting each individual vertex and moving it around. Could you do it? Yes. Would it be in a really inefficient and unintuitive way to do it? Also, yes, right? So there we go. And we want to avoid the same kind of stuff we want to avoid in the other instance. You don't want to grab part of the rock and pull it inside out, right? That's not going to look great. And yeah, the detail in the rock is going to be limited by the density of the topology. And so, yeah, we're not making a super, super detailed rock. We're just sort of testing out this workflow. Okay, I've got this. I'm going to come over to modifiers, and we're going to smooth. First of all, we're going to do both things. We're going to, let's go back to layout. We're going to turn on shade smooth. You'll see that that does a lot to make it look like a rock. And then if we want an additional level of, so remember the shade smooth shades out the interior, but the edges are still fairly chunky, right? The silhouette of the object. And so the applying a subdivision surface at this state, boom, sort of makes this smoother. You can sculpt with this on. If you come back to sculpting over here, you can grab things, and now you'll see how it works with this in place. You want to make this more irregular. And again, you can move your brush. I mean, having the brush be too big results in sort of manipulating the whole thing at one time. Having the brush be too small, it makes it, now you're just back to grabbing individual vertices. And so some sort of brush that's kind of like medium sized compared to the actual rock itself. The other brush you can investigate this week is just the regular draw brush, which is here. And so with the draw brush, this will, if you click and drag, you may have to turn up the strength. This will, essentially move the vertices out. If you control click, this will push the vertices in. Okay, so you're not going to be able to draw detail on it at the level of subdivisions that we have right now. It's by design, but you can use those tools. Those would be the two tools I would recommend. Okay, at the amount of geometry that we have here, those are the two tools that are going to be more effective. Okay, great. So now let's get this prepared. I'm going to grab this and Control C, and then let's go back to this one. And so I want this to be want the rock to be in the forest. And so if I Control V it over here, pasted it directly into that collection. I don't want to do that. I just want to Control V it here. There we go. All right, so I've got my rock. It's at this size. I'm going to Alt-G, Alt-R to put it at 0. And I just want to look at this rock, so I'm going to press slash. And so that just sort of isolates the rock here in the view. And that's good. So the slash I pressed was this slash. Ugh, that's backwards on the camera. The one that's next to the right shift key on the keyboard. The one that's above the function key. I don't know if that's true for every keyboard. The one that's below the comma. Or that's not the comma. The one that's below the semicolon. Okay, not the one that's above enter, which I believe is backslash. I always get confused which slash is backslash. Anyway, that's the thing that isolates one thing in the view, just sort of turns off the other stuff for a second. Great, and so here, let's inspect our rock. Remember, I want the rock to be scaled correctly before I put it into my system. And so this rock is far too large compared to these trees. So I'm going to press S and scale it down to maybe right about there. I am going to then zoom in on it, then address the anchor point. And so I want the anchor point on this rock to be at the bottom center. Yeah, right about there. Turn that off. Okay. And let's move back out. That's about the right size. Now, what do I need to do here? Apply scale. Control A, scale. Good. So my rock has been prepped. What is our prep checklist before you put something into a scatter or array? Anchor point or origin. Then apply scale after you actually scale to size. Get it to whatever the default is that you want for the size. You want both of those things correct before you put it into your procedural system. And now we'll put it into the procedural system. And so if I put it into the tree collection, boom. Now, if I come back out here, I have, every time it's putting stuff in my forest area, it's randomly selecting, in my case, between 3 different trees and the rock. And yeah, if I were to come back to the plane here and the scatter on surface and turn this up. Let's see. I think this works. This worked in Cinema 4D. So the hacky way, if you want to control the distribution here, would be to duplicate stuff in the collection. And I think that works here, right? So if I take the rock and I shift D it, there we go. I've got 2 rocks. Let's keep doing that. Yeah, that works. So here I'm, I'm a big wire fan. This is juking the stats or just sort of fixing the numbers, right? I just put more rocks in the array of stuff I get, and so I get a higher probability of rocks than trees at this point. And so it gives me more rocks. And so you can sort of weight the probabilities. You could do this in far more complex ways by like creating probably multiple weight painting maps and doing a bunch of stuff like that. Or you could just do this, right? And in this case, this will be fine. In order, like if I want more tall trees, I could just take the tall tree here and shift D it a couple times, and that would give me a greater preponderance of tall trees than short trees. So you can sort of change the makeup of your forest in a very easy way there. Now, check this out. If I come over here in this instance to ray tracing, right? We turned ray tracing on in the room, and everybody was like, woo, whoa, awesome, great, right? Watch what happens when I turn ray tracing on here. Meh, right? I mean, could you, like, you can sort of like A-B it a little bit, right? Why is that the case? There's not a lot of light bouncing here, right? In the other case, we have a constrained room. Light is bouncing around the room. It's much more impactful to the lighting of the overall situation. In an outdoor scene like this, it just doesn't contribute in the same way, especially the way that we have the scene set up here, right? And so I'll just leave it unchecked in this because it's just not making that big of a difference, right? No, the inversion of the room is not directly tied to the ray tracing. Like those are 2 separate issues, right? The inversion of the room just allows us to see into the wall, like we would see the inside of the back side of the other side of the walls of the building. Okay, and if it's not something, if you wanted to like, first of all, we didn't model the inside of the building at all. It's just like the outer shell, right? So it wouldn't be a technique for doing any sort of like cutaway where you see like the internal working of the rooms or something like that. You do that in a different fashion. But my point here is just that as you learn about rendering, there's certain boxes you check and they make things look better, but it's not ubiquitously true in every scenario, right? Knowing what that box does and why you're checking it helps you make the decision of like, do I need this box checked in this scene or not, right? And in an outdoor scene, you'll see it'll be making much less of a difference, right? For what we have going on here. I mean, I made the building reflective, and so you can sort of see the reflections in, like it's like one of those Phoenix buildings on Central, glass boxes, and so we get more, ray tracing. We were talking about the light, but it also matters for the reflections for reflective objects. So there's that. So it makes a little bit more of a difference there depending on how you have your building set up. Okay. Makes sense there, right? So I'll have you build some buildings and make, another dealer's choice object for your forest scene, and then using the modeling tools that we worked on, right? And so again, this is week 3, right? So not everything is on the table for you at this point. Try to work creatively within the tools that we talked about. If you find yourself dumping buckets of time into something I've never even talked about in class at this point, it's probably not a great strategy as a student, right? At this point. There's only so much time in class. I have to kind of like sequence the information so that it makes sense. And so we'll try to get to most things. But it's certainly possible to have ideas that you can't execute at this point. And that's okay, right? Just try to think about like, well, what could I do based on what I know? And try to focus on that, right? It's better to gain a solid understanding of the tools that we've talked about rather than a loose understanding of a bunch of other stuff. Awesome. Okay, everybody. And really great work this week. We will, I'll get this posted ASAP and we will reconvene on Monday. Those of you who took classes last semester, I'll be reaching out to everybody on Discord. The Artists of Promise submission date is Friday, this coming Friday. So I want people to submit, if you were in my classes last semester, certainly the projects you did by the end of the semester, submitting those for the Artists of Promise animation and video game competition. That